My name is Glenn Lewis. I'm an artist, and I live in Vancouver. Based my practice out of Vancouver. Um, I've been around for many, many years. I I started doing artwork with well, I went to it was called the Vancouver School of Art in those days in the 50s. I graduated in 1958, and I'm actually born in British Columbia. I was born in Chemainus. Um, I don't know if that's unusual these days, but maybe to be actually born in BC, because we do get a lot of people coming here to live. After I got out of art school, I went to England. Uh, I when at art school, I took painting and drawing and ceramics, but at that time in the 50s, it was sort of the high point of the New York school, like of abstract expressionism and painting, and I couldn't figure out like how could you be an abstract expressionist? You know, I've kind of thought of it maybe like throwing paint around or something. But so I decided that I wanted to do crafts, like in pottery. So I went to England and I spent 3 years at Leach Pottery, which was Bernard Leach's pottery. He was he more or less founded the kind of studio craft movement in the world, and he had a kind of unique position because he was brought up in Japan, well, Hong Kong and Japan, and with his grandparents, and I think his father was a judge in the colonial service of England and Hong Kong, something like that. Anyway, he then went back to England to study as a young man, and when he finished that, he decided that he wanted to come back to Japan and introduce engraving to the Japanese. But he got involved in making pottery when he came back, and with an old traditional potter called Kenzan. And when Kenzan died, he inherited the title of Kenzan, Kenzan the Seventh or something like that. I don't think he paid much attention to that, but still, it's curious that he did that. And he just learned it from this man who was basically made raku teaware, and things like that. So I spent 3 years at Leach Pottery. I learned how to make pots, like 100 pots a day kind of thing. You were a production potter, and I guess you kind of master the techniques and that kind of thing. And then I went and formed a pottery with John Reeve in Hennock in Devon, not far, the next county next to Cornwall, where the Leach Pottery was at St. Ives. And then I got a letter from Gordon Smith asking if I would come and teach at UBC in the education faculty. And so I came back to Vancouver and taught for a couple of years in the education faculty. That's where I taught Gathy Falk and Charmian Johnson and some others. Then after that, I got involved with Intermedia. Didn't do any pottery until I took it up again in about 2010. The work I'm showing in the exhibition here, what I've done actually, I've been trying to make artworks that combine photographs and pottery, because I think that crafts and fine art shouldn't be divided. I think they should all part of creative work. So basically what I was doing, I'm poetically, I guess, sort of associating photographs of roses with pottery. And the roses, I went to Germany and England to photograph the roses. And of course, I had to go around and smell the roses first, see if they were fragrant before I'd photograph them. And it's a little bit of a joke to photograph fragrant roses, right? But in the exhibition, I've associated the rose photographs with each pot. Um, and the pots are made of porcelain, but they broke when I shipped them back from England. I made them at the Leach Pottery when I went back for a residency there, and so they were mended like kintsugi mending with. Well, I did them myself. I didn't get Naoko to do those. I did them before I knew her, actually, and they're mended with a kind of epoxy putty, and then with gold leaf put on over that particular thing, so that they have a kind of tracery. It's kind of the art of mending, I guess you could call it. I think that's what kintsugi sort of means in Japanese. But I had a theme to the whole thing. I had this medieval theme, and part of it was because at the Leach Pottery, one of the great influences besides the Japanese that Bernard Leach brought to it was medieval pottery, in particular the medieval jugs. Medieval jugs are one of the great achievements of ceramic art in the world. English medieval jugs. They're incredible. Now, the medieval times, the rose was a great symbol. It was a symbol of the Virgin Mary. It was used, the fragrance of it, and rose water was used, partly because things weren't very hygienic in the medieval times, right? They used to throw the slops out in the street and that kind of thing. So, people would walk around, they'd pat themselves with rose water and maybe have some rose essence of rose. So roses were used in like you've heard of rose windows in cathedrals. I think it was recently or a few years ago when the cathedral in Paris burnt, and they were talking about the rose window. They were worried that it's the window that goes kind of like that. So that's one symbol. So that's partly why I used roses with the jugs, because I wanted to have this medieval theme. And medieval pottery, I think, is one of the great formalistic or forms that we find in ceramics. And after I went to the Europa Rosarium in Germany, I went to Dessau, which was not too far. It was I was in sort of Saxony, which was in eastern Germany, and that's where the Bauhaus had a big building, and that's where the first sort of modular housing project was done. The modernist. I went to sort of I took photos of the origins of the modernist movement, and basically, I mean, when you look at a medieval jug or a jug from a modern jug, there's not much difference. I mean, basically, things don't really change that much. And industrial pottery is actually copied from handmade pottery. I mean, jugs were copied, and tea cups and teapots and everything like that were copied from handmade ones. And so the industrial ones really are just like forms that basically have been cast in clay. And I think that's interesting because I noticed that a lot of people sort of use industrial pots as their models when they're making a pot, which I find kind of hilarious, because you need to really go back to the origins, right? The medieval origin where the industrial pot originated, right? They copied it. They actually just reenacted it or appropriated it. So anyway, that's kind of why you see the pictures of the roses and the pots that I displayed. They're mostly jugs.